Welcome everyone. Today we're driving into one of the most fascinating periods of European history, the Viking Age. Imagine a world between the 8th and 11th centuries where seafaring warriors, traders, and explorers set out from the coast of Scandinavia in longships that could navigate both rivers and open seas. These were the Vikings, a group of people who left an indelible mark on Europe, the British Isles, and even parts of the North Atlantic. When we talk about Vikings, many people immediately think of raiders with horned helmets. But that image is more myth than reality. Vikings were also farmers, craftsmen, traders, and settlers. They came from what is now Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and their societies were complex, with laws, social hierarchies, and rich oral traditions. The Viking Age began around 793 CE with the infamous raid on the Lindisfarne monastery in England. This attack shocked Europe and became a symbol of the Vikings' power and reach. However, it was just the start of an era that lasted more than 2 centuries, shaping economies, politics, and cultures far beyond. By the end of this video, we'll see how the Vikings' legacy continues to influence the modern world, from place names in Britain and Ireland to the Norse myths that inspires literature and popular culture. Right now, we will focus on understanding who the Vikings were, where they came from, and how their societies were organized, which sets the stage for understanding their later exploits and impacts. Let's now explore their daily lives. Picture yourself in a small Scandinavian village around the year 900. The sun barely rises in winter, and communities rely on each other for survival. Viking society was built on hierarchy, with kings and jarls, or nobles, at the top, followed by free farmers and craftsmen, and then thralls, or slaves, at the bottom. Despite this hierarchy, social bonds were strong. Villagers shared work from planting crops and tending livestock to building homes and longships. Women played essential roles, managing households, spinning wool, making clothes, and sometimes running farms, while men were away on trading or raiding voyages. Viking women could inherit property and had certain legal rights, which was unusual in medieval Europe. Religion was central to daily life. The Vikings believed in a pantheon of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freyja. Rituals, sacrifices, and festivals marked the seasons and sought favor from these gods, especially before important journeys or battles. Storytelling was equally vital. Skalds or poets preserved histories, genealogies, and heroic tales, keeping the memory of ancestors alive and reinforcing social values like bravery, loyalty, and honor. Trade and craftsmanship were also fundamental. Vikings were not just raiders, they were skilled merchants and artisans. They built advanced ships that could travel hundreds of miles, enabling them to trade furs, timber, amber, and iron across Europe, the Middle East, and even North Africa. Jewelry, weapons, and tools were not only practical but also artistic expressions of Viking culture. Let's move from daily life to one of the most famous aspects of the Vikings, their raids and expansion. When we think of Vikings, images of long ships cutting through foggy waters, warriors with axes and shields, storming monasteries often come to mind. But it's important to understand why and how these raids happened and what they tell us about Viking society and strategy. By the late 8th century, Scandinavia was experiencing significant population growth and limited arable land. Younger sons who would not inherit family farms needed new opportunities. Coupled with political rivalries among chieftains, this pushed many Vikings to seek wealth abroad. Their first recorded raid in England occurred in 793 at the Lindisfarne monastery. Chroniclers describe it as a shocking attack on a holy site, with the monks slaughtered and treasures taken. This event was not isolated. It was the beginning of over 2 centuries of Viking expansion across Europe. Vikings were not just ruthless fighters, they were strategic planners and expert navigators. Their longships were marvels of engineering, capable of both deep-sea voyages and navigating shallow rivers. This allowed them to attack inland towns and monasteries with little warning, creating fear across regions from the British Isles to France. For example, by the 9th century, Vikings had established strongholds along the Seine River in France, even receiving land in exchange for loyalty and tribute. This shows that Vikings were as much negotiators and settlers as raiders. Evidence of their trades and colonization further illustrates this dual nature. In Ireland, Vikings founded Dublin, initially as a raiding base, which grew into a major trading center. In Eastern Europe, the Varangians, who were Vikings, traveled along rivers to trade furs, slaves, and amber with the Byzantine Empire. Archaeological findings, such as coins from the Middle East and Viking settlements, confirm the wide reach of their networks. These raids were not random, they were part of a sophisticated system combining military skill, navigation, and commerce. The impact of these raids extended beyond immediate wealth. They disrupted local power structures, influenced political changes, and contributed to the development of defensive architecture, such as fortified towns and castles. Furthermore, Viking settlements introduced Scandinavian culture, language, and customs into new regions, leaving a legacy that can still be traced in place names, legal codes, and even DNA across Europe. After their initial raids, many Vikings transitioned from raiders to settlers, establishing permanent communities across Europe. These settlements were not only military outposts, they became centers of trade, culture, and political influence. In Ireland, Vikings founded Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick. These towns grew rapidly, serving as hubs for commerce between Scandinavia, Britain, and the wider European continent. Archaeological evidence, including workshops, tools, and imported goods, shows that Viking settlements were sophisticated and economically vibrant. In England, Vikings established the Danelaw, a region in northern and eastern England under Viking control. Here, they introduced their own laws and customs, which coexisted with Anglo-Saxon traditions. Place names such as York, Grimsby, and Derby reflect the Scandinavian influence, and linguistic traces remain in English dialects. The Danelaw illustrates that Viking integration was not only military, it was administrative, legal, and cultural. In Normandy, Vikings under Rollo negotiated with the French king, receiving land in exchange for loyalty and protection against further Viking raids. This agreement led to the establishment of a Norman identity, blending Scandinavian and Frankish traditions. Over time, Normans became key players in European politics, culminating in events like the Norman conquest in England in 1066. This demonstrates how Viking settlers could adapt to local societies, adopting new practices while influencing the region's development. Viking settlements were also evident in the East. The Varangians, traveling along rivers in Russia, established key trade centers such as Novgorod and Kiev. These cities became important nodes in the trade network connecting the Baltic to the Byzantine Empire, facilitating the exchange of furs, slaves, and luxury goods. The founding of the Kievan Rus highlights the Vikings' ability to integrate with local Slavic populations, influencing political structures, military organization, and commerce. Integration was not always peaceful, but Vikings often formed alliances through marriage, diplomacy, and trade. Their interactions with local populations led to a two-way exchange of culture, technology, and knowledge. Viking art, shipbuilding techniques, and military strategies influenced the societies they settled among, while they adopted local customs and languages. This cultural blending shaped the evolution of medieval Europe in ways that extended far beyond Scandinavia. The Vikings were not only warriors and settlers, they were also skilled traders who established vast networks across Europe and beyond. Trade was central to Viking society, allowing them to acquire wealth, resources, and influence far from their Scandinavian homelands. Archaeological finds such as coins, jewelry, and imported goods reveal the extensive reach of Viking commerce, linking Scandinavia to the British Isles, continental Europe, the Middle East, and even Central Asia. In Scandinavia, marketplaces in towns like Hedeby and Birka became crucial hubs. Merchants sold furs, amber, honey, and slaves in exchange for silver, spices, wine, and textiles. These markets were well organized, supporting both local economies and long-distance trade. Viking ships renowned for their speed and versatility, allowed traders to navigate rivers and seas efficiently, reaching cities such as Paris, Constantinople, and Baghdad. This mobility gave them a competitive advantage, enabling rapid transports of goods and facilitating diplomatic missions alongside commercial ventures. Trade also encouraged cultural and technological exchange. The Vikings imported not only material goods, but also ideas, artistic styles, and technologies. For instance, Byzantine coins and Islamic silver were found in Scandinavia, illustrating connections with distant civilizations. These contexts influenced Viking art, craftsmanship, and even military technology, such as improvements in shipbuilding and weaponry. Economic interaction also reinforced political relationships. Local rulers often relied on Viking traders to supply wealth and resources, while Vikings benefited from protection and market access. In addition to long distance trade, Vikings maintained local economies within their settlements. Craftsmen produced tools, weapons, and luxury items, while farmers contributed agricultural products. Coastal and river trade facilitated communication between settlements. Vikings acted as an intermediate point connecting regions that were otherwise isolated and creating a network of economic and cultural exchange that strengthened their influence across Europe. Slavery was another component of the Viking economy. Captives taken during raids were traded or sold, often reaching markets as far away as the Middle East. While morally troubling by modern standards, slavery was a widespread economic practice in medieval Europe and contributed to the wealth of Viking merchants. Viking influence extended far beyond their raids and trade. They left a profound cultural and religious mark on the regions they interacted with. While often remembered as fierce warriors, Vikings also carried their beliefs, traditions, and artistic expressions wherever they went, shaping local societies and leaving lasting legacies. Religion was central to Viking life. They worshipped a pantheon of gods, including Odin, Thor, and Freyja, and rituals often involved offerings, feasts, and sacrifices. Religious practices were deeply intertwined with daily life, influencing decisions from warfare to agriculture. As Vikings settled in foreign lands, their beliefs sometimes merged with local traditions. For example, in regions like the British Isles, Norse mythology influenced folklore, place names, and customs, leaving traces that persist in literature and cultural memory even after the Vikings converted to Christianity. Art and craftsmanship were also significant aspects of Viking culture. The Vikings were skilled metalworkers, woodcarvers, and textile producers. Intricate designs such as interlacing patterns and animal motifs were used in jewelry, weapons, and everyday objects. These artistic forms spread through trade and settlement, blending with local styles and inspiring new traditions. Archaeological finds such as the Osberg ship burial in Norway reveal a high level of sophistication and indicate the importance of ceremonial and artistic expression in Viking society. Language was another area of influence. Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, left a lasting imprint on the English language and the other European languages. Words like sky, window, and knife originated from Old Norse, while place names such as those ending in by or thorp reflect Norse settlements. This linguistic legacy illustrates how Vikings integrated into the regions they settled, not only for conquest, but through everyday life and community formation. Viking cultural impact also included social organization and law. Settlements often followed establishments of norms and assemblies, known as things, where free men could participate in decision-making and dispute resolution. These structures influenced local governance in areas where Vikings settled, including parts of Ireland, Scotland, and northern England. Moreover, Viking mythology and stories such as the sagas preserved histories, heroic deeds, and moral lessons, becoming a cornerstone of Scandinavian literary tradition. These narratives influenced not only the cultural identity of Scandinavia, but also inspired later European literature, from medieval epics to modern novels and films. By the late 11th century, the Viking Age was drawing to a close. Several factors contributed to this decline, including the consolidation of powerful European kingdoms, the spread of Christianity, and changes in trade and warfare. As centralized monarchies strengthened, they were able to resist raids more effectively, fortify coasts, and organize armies that challenged Viking incursions. The growing influence of the church also played a role, converting many Norse populations to Christianity and altering traditional Viking social structures, religious practices, and even motivations for warfare. The transformation of Viking societies from raiders to settled communities marks another reason for the end of the Viking Age. Many Vikings established permanent settlements in England, Ireland, Normandy, and parts of Russia, integrating with local populations. This shift from mobility and plunder to farming, trade, and governance meant that Viking expansion slowed and their societies began to resemble the kingdoms they once raided. Over generations, the Norse elite adopted the languages, laws, and customs of their new homelands, blending Viking culture with local traditions. Despite this decline, the impact of the Vikings remained significant.